There is a quote by Galileo Galilei that goes, "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who has endowed us with sense, reason, and intellect has intended us to forgo their use." This is something I hear atheist YouTubers, such as Stephen Woodford of Rationality Rules, say from time to time in their videos. Sometimes it's intended more as a quip than as a strong argument, making fun of Christians and religious people in general for their blind faith and pointing out that one has to avoid critical thinking in order to think any of the arguments for God are good. In Galileo's time, he probably believed in God, and so what he meant is that the Catholic Church labeled it as a heresy to believe that the Earth wasn't the center of the cosmos, but the evidence contradicted that. And Galileo didn't think it made any sense that God would give us the ability to discover things like the heliocentric model, but then not want us to discover those things. So the meaning of the original quote is more of a critique on the Catholic Church and their depiction of God, not God in general. But then, of course, in the following hundreds of years, many people found that if you continue to use your intellect further, then the quote does go against the very concept of God. Now the idea is that it seems silly for a God to give us rational faculties that lead to the conclusion that God doesn't exist, but then demand that we suppress those faculties in order to maintain belief in him. To the extent that this quote is used as an argument, as something that's intended to change a Christian's mind, or at least pose a challenge to them, it doesn't work on them. It bounces right off. And there are three main reasons I can think of as to why. There are many Christians that believe that intellect is not a godly thing. It's something that Satan uses to lead us astray. Watch this unhinged Uberboyo video to see an example of this, where, if memory serves, he says that left brain thinking, aka logical reasoning, is satanic in nature and leading our society away from God. The Christians using this first reason would actually agree with the quote, because in their view, God didn't give us our intellect. Intellect is a corruption of our nature. This is expressed in the very first chapter of the Bible. According to Genesis, God created us ignorant and wanted us to stay that way. But we chose, perhaps with the help of Satan, to gain the capacity for critical thinking by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So intellect is the result of original sin, something God did not want. The virtues of blind faith and anti-intellectualism are baked right into the Bible's first chapter. For many Christians, this quote/argument is unconvincing because rather than being some strange contradiction or oxymoron, it represents a theme, the very essence of what it means to be a good Christian. Restraining yourself from doing things that you have the ability to do, aka not sinning. It's not just intellect that God gave you the ability to use, but doesn't want you to use. There are several things that God doesn't want you to do, such as have sex before marriage, masturbate, or have gay sex. Whether the Bible explicitly prohibits these things or not, many Christians believe them to be immoral. They believe them to be sins. To many Christians, Galileo's quote, at least used in the modern context, seems silly, as from their view, it completely misunderstands God. God is exactly the type to give you the ability to do things and then ask that you never do them. Even non-Christians will agree with some of these things, like how just because you have the ability to murder doesn't mean that God wants you to murder. Of course, non-religious people don't believe in God, so really it should be just because you have the ability to do a thing doesn't mean you should do a thing. The point is that you never hear the quote attributed to other things beyond intellect, such as, "I do not feel obliged to believe that the same God who endowed us with rage, fists, and the capacity to kill has intended us to forgo their use." And to a Christian, intellect is just one thing on the long list of things that God wants you to avoid. There are many Christians who would hear this quote and agree with it, but not because, like in the first reason, God wasn't the one who gave us our intellect, but because they think God does want us to use our intellect. They think that critical thinking and reason lead to belief in God. From my experience, this reason is the most popular one. These are the types of people who think that there is an abundance of evidence for the existence of God, and that the philosophical arguments for God are sound. They might even think that atheists are the deluded ones, or that atheists are ignorant or acting on blind faith, and that they, the Christians, are the ones thinking clearly. Alternatively, they might say that all tools can be used for good and evil. Thinking is a tool, but if thinking points you in the direction of God's non-existence, then you're using that tool for evil. To them, logic is a tool that can be used to go wherever you want to go. It's a tool that should be used, but you just have to make sure that you're using it wisely. And they think that atheists are using it unwisely. These might be the type of Christians that think that atheists do believe in God and just hate him, and use their reasoning abilities to live in denial. This whole time I've been mostly saying Christians, but of course this applies to more than just Christians. It applies at least equally well to Muslims, for instance. I just thought that saying Christians repeatedly would be less cumbersome than saying religious people or God believers over and over. So whichever of these three reasons they use, or maybe another reason that I haven't even thought of, religious people are not fazed by this quote. I would say that this quote is one that largely just preaches to the choir, so to speak. To be fair, I've never heard this quote used as an atheist's whole argument, but I have heard it used as part of their videos. Just because I don't think this quote is effective against religious people doesn't mean that I think people should stop saying it. But maybe they should stop saying it like it's some slam dunk, because it's not. At least not to a Christian, and presumably that's the person you're trying to convince. Anyway, that's about all I had to say on the topic, so thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.